Good evening, everybody, to another Agile Expertise meetup. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope you're nice and safe and well wherever you are in the world right now. Tonight, I'm really pleased that we get to have Gwen Hughes joining us all the way from Wales, UK, for her inaugural meetup event with us here at Agile Expertise. And I'm really excited to listen to what she's going to share with us. And her talk this evening is going to be about how many Scrum teams can you realistically Scrum Master? As ever, want to say thank you to Agile Expertise for obviously allowing us, or Expertise Recruitment for allowing us to actually be here and host this evening. And obviously, I look forward to obviously having you all join in with the Q&A session at the end of this evening's discussion. So, Gwen, without any further things being said and done, you have hosting duties. Over to you, and really looking forward to your talk this evening.
Thank you very much, and hello everyone. Thank you all for joining, and especially a huge big thank you to Giles and Chantal for organising and for inviting me here to speak to you all this evening. It's been a goal of mine for a while to take up public speaking once again, so I'm ever so grateful to be given the opportunity tonight. Throughout my talk this evening, I welcome you to send your thoughts through the chat on Zoom, but as I'm a bit nervous and easily distracted, I probably won't be able to respond to them until afterwards, but please don't let that stop you. Speaking of tonight, I'll be asking how many Scrum teams can you realistically Scrum Master? But before we jump down into business, I thought I should tell you a bit more about me, just so you know who you're listening to for the next 40 minutes or so. So my name is Gwen. I wasn't named after Gwen Stefani of the 90s band, no doubt, but after the wife of a builder who was doing some renovation work for my parents at the time of my mother's pregnancy. If we had a bit more time, I'd tell you a funny story about when I first met Gwen in some public toilets a few years ago, but maybe another day. If you're not quite sure where to place my accent, I'll put you out of your misery. I'm from Anglesey in North Wales. Anglesey is famous as being home to the town with the longest place name in Europe and the second longest official one-word place name in the world. Here is a photo of me and the sign in the train station in the town. This photo is about 10 years old. The sign is still there, but thankfully my fashion sense has moved on. The name of the town can be seen here in the green, and I believe underneath it is the phonetic pronunciation. I'm first language Welsh speaker, so yes, I can pronounce the name of the town, but usually only in exchange for a gin and tonic. So tough luck tonight, folks.
We've actually had Femi say, please pronounce it. So, you know, whether we're in safe space and if you're comfortable, I think we probably need to. I can supply some G&T if need be.
I'm voting for yes as well. Please do.
I will hold you to that, Giles. So in exchange for that promise G&T, so it's Llanfair Pwllgwyngyll go gerich Chwyndrobwy Llantysilio go go goch. And if you want me to say it again, that is another gin and tonic, unfortunately.
This was the password for the secret kind of handshake on the movie Barbarella with Jane Fonda.
I think it was, yeah. So, but yeah, it's a bit of a fun tidbit for you there. I graduated in computer science before I started working as a software engineer in Now TV and Sky, just over 4 years before making the leap into Scrum Mastery over there. And I've now been a Scrum Master for over 3 years, although I'm now technically an Agile team lead working for a company called Zappi, where I've been working for the last 2.5 very exciting years. You might have come here tonight expecting to hear a Scrum Master talk, so you might be a bit confused that I've just referred to myself as an Agile team lead. Don't worry, this was a decision we made in Zappi to rebrand our Scrum Masters in an attempt to better reflect what exactly we do in our roles for better clarification throughout the business. I've added here that Agile Team Lead equals Scrum Master with superpowers. I cannot confirm or deny that. But for the purposes of this talk, I'll revert back to calling myself a Scrum Master, just to keep it nice and simple. So hopefully you no longer feel as though we're strangers, so I can stop talking about myself and we can get down to business. A good Scrum Master can handle 2 teams. A great Scrum Master can handle one. I first heard this quote from a colleague of mine when we were discussing this exact question. How many Scrum teams can you really handle? I'm not sure who said it originally, but it runs through my mind quite often. I won't say anything else about this quote right now. We'll revisit it towards the end of the presentation, but I'd like you to all keep it in mind as you listen to me this evening, and hopefully you can tell me your take on it a bit later on. I'd like to start the session by asking you a couple of questions. So, because I always secretly wanted to host Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, I'd like to ask the audience. I'd like you to please head to a lovely tool called Menti. You can either click on the link that I will share in the channel now. Here we go. Or you can head to www.menti.com and put in the participation code 7013178. You should be then prompted to vote. The first question is, how many Scrum teams have you simultaneously worked as a Scrum Master with? I'm aware that not everyone here is a Scrum Master, so if you're not, please think about a Scrum Master you know. What's the most amount of teams they've worked simultaneously with? This could be your Scrum Master or a colleague or a friend. The options are 1, 2, 3, or 4 or more. When you've cast your vote, please come back and join me on Zoom and we'll have a look together what the results are. And just because I'm a bit extra, here's some countdown music to get you on the mood.
Love it, Ben.
So the votes are still coming in. Well, I think that's a very long version of the countdown music. It's nearly an hour long. Anyway, I'll stop it there. Hopefully you can all see the results on my screen. So we've got 2 people that have worked with 1 team. 7 people have both worked with 2 teams and 3 teams, and 2 people have shockingly worked simultaneously as a Scrum Master with 4 or more teams. I'd like you to go back to Menti and I'd like you to answer this next question for me. How many Scrum teams should a Scrum Master ideally simultaneously work with? There's no right answer here. There's no wrong answer. Just tell me what you think. And again, it's 1, 2, 3, or 4. And there we go. I'll see if the countdown music is a bit shorter this time. There we go. Oh, God, I can't believe I found an hour-long version of that by mistake. So we can see, if you have a look at the screen that I'm sharing, that there's a bit more alignment here. So 12 people think that ideally a Scrum Master should work simultaneously with 12, and 5 of you think that 5 of you think that a Scrum Master should work ideally with 2 teams. So thank you all so much for taking part in that. It was really great to hear what you think. I guess you're wondering what I think and what my answer would be. Well, I could just blurt it out, but where would the fun be in that? Instead, let's take a look at my experiences so far. Zappi to meet you, Zappi to be here, but who is Zappi? There are plenty of fun play on words for Zappi. That could be a meetup in itself. But Zappi is an ad and innovation testing platform built by brands for brands. So we operate in the market research industry. Our head office is based in London, where until COVID happened, you would usually find me, but we also have offices in Boston and Cape Town, and we have individuals working all across the globe, from Canada to Bulgaria to Singapore. Zappi employs around 190 people worldwide. This photo at the bottom here is the Zappi team taken in Crete in 2018 during our last company days away. That obviously didn't happen this year. Out of those 190 employees, 80 work in our build department. By build, I mean technology. So those 80 people are either developers, testers, product owners, or Scrum Masters like myself. Those 80 build employees are split up into 10 or so teams. But we only have 2 dedicated Scrum Masters and 2 developers who also work as Scrum Masters within their respective teams. When I say dedicated Scrum Masters, I mean that we don't also work as product owners, developers, testers, etc. So for argument's sake, let's call it 4 Scrum Masters in total over 10 teams. We don't quite have the luxury of having 1 Scrum Master per team. So what did that mean for me? It meant that I was the Scrum Master of 3 teams simultaneously. Nothing makes more sense than the nicknames of development teams, and the 3 teams I worked with were the Oilers, the Minions, and the Potatoes. And here are our lovely team logos that we are very proud of, and why wouldn't we be? Because they are fantastic. We also have a potato emoji for every occasion. The Oilers were working on internal automation, so some tooling for our internal teams, integrating with Salesforce, etc. The Minions were working on the user management system, so user sign up and login, sharing resources, etc. And the Potatoes were working on our sampling platform. Sample in this sense being a market research term referring to survey respondents, which at a high level doesn't sound like a lot, but trust me, sampling is a huge monster. The 3 teams had their own individual POs, developers, and testers. I was the common denominator. The teams were also very independent, had their own ways of working and preferences when it came to certain processes. What I want to make clear with this slide is these teams were working in wildly different areas. There was little or no overlap in their domains and key concerns. Working with the Potatoes, for example, didn't give me much advantage when it came to working with the Minions. So let's break this down into numbers, time-related numbers. Each of these teams worked on 2-week-long sprints, spent 15 minutes every day in daily Scrum, spent an hour every 2 weeks in retro and planning, spent 30 minutes every 2 weeks in sprint review, and in addition to that, an hour each week in product backlog refinement. So every 2 weeks, I would spend 7.5 hours in the daily Scrum, 3 hours in sprint planning, 3 hours in sprint retro, 1.5 hours in sprint review, and 6 hours in product backlog refinement. I don't think I need to spell this out, but these numbers are obviously 3 times as much as what I would hope to be spending with 1 Scrum team. But I'm a sucker for a nice graph, as you will see as we continue through this deck. So I created a nice graph to illustrate those numbers. Any excuse for a graph. And here we have the first nice graph. The pink denotes how long I'd spend in each of these events with 1 team, and the blue is the additional time I'd spend with the 2 other teams. When you see it like this, you can see how much more time it really takes to take on 1 or 2 extra teams. But it wasn't always like that. I didn't just wake up one day and find myself as the first-time Scrum Master with 3 teams. Just the thought of that gives me heartburn, to be honest. When I first answered the Scrum calling and took that leap into the unknown, I was the Scrum Master for 1 team. This was back in my time at Now TV and in Sky. Nearly a year later, when I joined Zappi, that's when I found myself with 2 Scrum teams. But I thought that would be fine. After all, there were some responsibilities that I was leaving behind at Now TV, such as line management, that would surely free up more time to work with 2 teams rather than 1. Fast forward another year, and I was asked if I wouldn't mind looking after another team. A pretty mature, stable team, but a 3rd team nonetheless. And because I can't say no, and because I'm a glutton for punishment, I said yes. And that's how I found myself in the boat of being a Scrum Master with 3 teams. And as I've just mentioned, I am a sucker for pretty graph, and here's another one, but this one is rather useless, I'm not going to lie. But this shows how my time as a Scrum Master has correlated to the amount of teams I have. For every year I've been a Scrum Master, I've picked up another Scrum team. So now that you know that I have experiences of both sides of the coin, being dedicated to 1 team and essentially being a shared resource, I'd love to talk a bit about the pros and cons of being a Scrum Master for multiple teams and tell you a bit what that looks like. So keep in mind, my pros and cons are from the perspective of someone who was working with 3 wildly different teams. Let's tackle the pros first. Pro, getting a wide understanding of the Zappi platform. Being a part of 3 separate teams means I quite easily absorb a lot of information about how our platform works. Another pro, many opportunities for experimenting and growth. When I had 2 or 3 teams, I felt like I was learning and developing at 2 or 3 times the speed I normally would with 1 team. Think about it. Between every Oilers retro, I was running 2 retros with other teams. So hypothetically speaking, my retro skills would improve somewhat in those 2 weeks. working with lots of different people. If you ask me why I wanted to be a Scrum Master, the main reason would be because I wanted to work more with people than with code. So working with 3 different teams definitely ticks that box. Always being busy, especially nowadays, working from home all the time. Being so busy means I can jump out of bed in the morning and the day goes so fast. Being busy clearly keeps me sane. Finally, being invited to multiple team events. This is a bit of a running joke in Zappi, but I get to go to a lot of team events, or I would normally when code isn't around. I'm not going to say any more about this, just in case our head of finance gets a hold of this recording. If he does, he is a very nice man, and good evening to you, sir. Hopefully he won't. So now, time for the cons. An inability to go deep on any domain, the almost exact opposite of the first pro. I'm unable to go deep and understand any of these 3 domains to an expert level. Process switching. With every team doing certain things ever so slightly differently, I have to be on the ball. For example, so the potato team expect me to ask them this in the daily scrum, but the minions want me to talk through the columns, whereas the Oilers want me to be quiet. Heaven forbid I forget which team was expecting what, because chaos would surely ensue. Then there's lack of time and focus. I often find myself saying, oh, I can't come to that whiteboard session, it clashes with another retro I've got, or wait, what bug? I haven't heard of that before. What's the problem? What happened? Or my favorite thing to say is, I'll have to add that to my to-do list and hopefully get it done next week. Speaking of lists, my endless to-do list. I can't remember a time when I had less than 5 things on my to-do list. If it's prepare for retro, then once I cross retro off for this week, it reappears next week. There's also prioritization. Some things never make it out of the bottom 5 of the list. So while they're worthy tasks, they always get deprioritized. This contradicts one of my pros about personal development because I spend a lot of time doing repeated admin, which means work I want to do on flow metrics gets pushed down the list, which is a shame as it's something I'm really interested in and have been for some time now. Having to do everything 3 times. Sometimes in Zappi, someone will have a great idea, a really great idea. Sometimes it's even me, believe it or not. That idea could be running team feedback sessions or doing a roles and responsibility session. I always think they're a great idea, right up until the point in which I realize I have to do it 3 times. Not quite being able to help the teams as much as I want. This relates to the first con about being unable to go deep in any one domain. Not only can I not go deep, but I don't fully understand some of the blockers the team are having, which makes it very difficult for me to unblock them and to essentially do my job to a level that I deem satisfactory. Finally, feeling like a failure. This is a very personal one for me, but more often than not, I feel like I'm letting the teams down. I feel like I'm always being reactive rather than proactive. I'm putting out fires, not preventing them. I can never see things coming because I'm looking elsewhere. I feel like a failure more often than I would like to admit. My experience got me thinking, what next? If I've gained a Scrum team for every year as Scrum Master so far, what's to stop this trend from continuing? I see Giles mentioned looking forward to year 10. Well, I did find myself asking, will I gain a 4th team next year, then a 5th? When will it stop? Now, we haven't had a cute little graph for at least 5 minutes, so let's get another one in. So assuming this trend does indeed continue, then it would look like this going forward. Shock horror. I'm obviously catastrophizing here, catastrophizing being one of my favorite hobbies as it happens. I have no intention of being a Scrum Master for the next 10 years and having 10 teams at that point, although the way the pension age in the UK is going, I might not have many other options. But if I still was a Scrum Master in 7 years, I doubt I'd be working with 10 teams. Anyway, you might at this point want to pull me to one side and say, hey, Gwen, calm down. You're panicking here, deep breaths. And you're probably right. But I challenge you and I ask you how sure you are that this isn't a trend. And worse than that it's not a trend that's set to continue. To see whether or not I am in fact panicking and to see whether or not this is a trend, I'd like to look at the evolution of the Scrum Master role and to try to figure out if my assumption has been wrong all along and if it's normal for a Scrum Master to be shared across multiple teams. So let's take a trip to the past and see what the X has been telling us over time. Oh, and this little guy in the bottom right-hand corner, if it's unfamiliar to you, this is a TARDIS from the TV show Doctor Who. TARDIS standing for time and relative dimension in space, and it's a time traveling device. One day you'll thank me for telling you what TARDIS stands for because it comes up in TV and pub quizzes more often than you'd think. So all of us here probably know that the Scrum was conceived in the early 90s, around 93, 94. What I tried my hardest to find out was what the Scrum Master role looked like back then with regards to teams. This was a much job than I expected. After a lot of research, I found a blog named The First Scrum Project Manager by Jeff Sutherland. Jeff Sutherland obviously being one of the creators of Scrum. This blog was about the idea of a Scrum Master coming about in 1993. He mentions that the Scrum Master was designed to be a better project manager in the summer of 1993. He described how his experience in seeing a consultant attempt to project manage a huge project for Pete's Aviation led the way to the first Scrum Master role being given to, and I am going to butcher this name now, and I promised I did try my hardest to find the pronunciation online, but I couldn't, so I can only apologize in advance. The first Scrum Master role was given to John Scomnotales in Easel. I'm so sorry. He mentions how John was the lead engineer with outstanding interpersonal skills and how John still spent 80% of his time coding when he became Scrum Master for the team. That, and I quote, was the design goal for the first Scrum Master. And there we have it. So originally, the Scrum Master was a developer on the team and quite obviously would work for one team. I've also heard, but failed to track down sources, that say originally the role of Scrum Master was so fluid that it was intended to be rotated around development team members. After that, I tracked down a 1998 paper called Scrum, an extension pattern language for hyperproductive software development from Mike Beadle, Martin Devos, Jonat Sharon, Jeff Sutherland, and Ken Schwaber. I hope I did a better job of saying those names. This paper states that the main role of the Scrum Master would be in the daily Scrum, in which the Scrum Master would log what tasks have been, log all blocks, and later find a way to resolve the blocks, and help the team members choose the appropriate tasks to work on with the help of the architect. It's quite easy to see back in 98 how someone could easily spend 80% of their time developing if that's the sum of their responsibility as a Scrum Master. But if we fast forward to 2001 and to Agile Software Development with Scrum, a book by Ken Schwaber and Mike Beadle, we can see the role of Scrum Master has been fleshed out a bit. The book compares a Scrum Master to a sheepdog, keeping the flock together and the wolves away. And now you've got it where I've got a picture of a really beautiful dog on this slide. A perfectly simple but effective quote from the book. To put it simply, Scrum Masters make Scrum work. And it goes into some detail about how the Scrum Master can do that. It is not an exhaustive list, but the Scrum Master is the one that engages with management, improve processes, is responsible for removing impediments, works with the product owner to create a product backlog, and works with the Scrum team to plan the sprint. So we can see how this might require a bit more than the initial 20% of a developer's time. Is this where the Scrum Master role starts to evolve into being its own standalone role? I haven't read all the books and all the materials out there, but personally, I think it might be. If we were to jump to the first ever Scrum Guide in 2010, we can see a bit more of what's expected out of a Scrum Master at that time. And it states here that the Scrum Master may be part of the team, such as a developer performing sprint tasks. However, if this is the case, there may be conflict between removing impediments and performing tasks. The Scrum Master is never the product owner. So whilst we can maybe see how there's been movement away from the Scrum Master also being a developer on the team, there's still nothing about a Scrum Master having more than one team. To jump to the very latest Scrum Guide, which was only released this week, we can see a new addition to its definition that states how Scrum requires a Scrum Master to foster an environment where a product owner orders the work for a complex problem into a product backlog, the Scrum team turns a selection of the work into an incremental value during a sprint, and the Scrum team and its stakeholders inspect the results and adjust for the next sprint, and then repeat. So this solidifies how important a Scrum Master is to the team. But finally, I found this line. The 2020 Scrum Guide states that if Scrum teams become too large, they should consider reorganizing into multiple cohesive Scrum teams, each focused on the same product. Therefore, they should share the same product goal, product backlog, and product owner. Despite sharing all these common resources, they don't mention sharing a Scrum Master. So I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb here and say that by definition, Scrum Masters, even in 2020, are not intended to be shared. There we have it, my foray into the history of Scrum Masters completed. And I'm feeling like I'm an exception to the rule, or I was until I saw your results of the poll earlier. But I felt comforted by the fact that maybe in 7 years' time, I won't have 10 teams after all. And I verified that this isn't a trend that's grown from our almighty Scrum leaders. But wait, a few weeks ago, I decided to do some investigating and found out if I had been in a unique situation operating against the unspoken rule of Scrum. Was I the only one who was working with multiple teams? I know from your poll results that I wasn't, but what did LinkedIn say? These are some nameless job descriptions that I found in the last couple of weeks. So the first one, be experienced at manage multiple Scrum teams simultaneously. The ambiguity there scares me. Act as a Scrum Master. Oh, Siri always being helpful. Where was I? Act as a Scrum Master for 1 to 3 teams. At least there's an upper limit here. Scrum Master to take on at least one. That at least one there sounds almost threatening. Be experienced at managing multiple Scrum teams simultaneously. Not the same job posting as the first, but exact same wording on this point. Leading multidiscipline teams. This isn't obviously asking you to look after more than one team, but they're using a plural, so I'm not letting them get away with it. 1 or more of our agile teams. Different teams, plural again, across multiple teams. 1 or more teams, and finally, 1 or more delivery teams. So safe to say, I'm not in a unique situation. But why though? So I've established that I'm not in this boat alone, and to be honest with you, it's quite nice to have company. I don't want to spend too long on this point, but I couldn't help but ask myself, why? Why are all these companies making up their own rules for Scrum and Scrum Masters? These are just some ideas I've had. I have no idea if they're accurate, but they're just my best guesses as to why all these companies are hiring one Scrum Master for multiple teams. A misunderstanding of Scrum and how to execute it. I'm assuming that if it took me an afternoon of investigating to come to the conclusion that Scrum Masters shouldn't be shared across teams, then some companies might be none the wiser either. And if they see other companies do it, well, why wouldn't they follow suit? Negativity towards the Scrum Master role. A bit of a controversial one, especially maybe in this group. But every now and again, I hear rumors that so-and-so doesn't like Scrum Masters. They don't know what Scrum Masters do all day after the daily Scrum, and they think Scrum Masters are pointless. If that's the view in the company, why would they want to hire one for every team? Although this does beg the question, why do they have Scrum Masters at all? But that's for another day. Then there's budgeting constraints. This might be the most realistic one, not having the money to hire more Scrum Masters. I'm sure the majority of companies would love to be in a position where they could hire more Scrum Masters, but due to financial constraints, they can't, meaning that the ones they have just have to pitch in and make do. Whilst developers prove their worth very easily through lines of code and functionality delivered, the worth of a Scrum Master is hidden beneath the surface, and it might just make more sense at a superficial level to hire more developers to bring in more money faster. Finally, failure to see the value a Scrum Master can provide. Some companies just might not know the value that a dedicated Scrum Master can provide, and if they can't see the value, do you blame them for not taking the risk? If you've got any other ideas, or if you disagree with some of mine, post them in the chat and I would love to have a read over them later. Success as a multi-team Scrum Master. What I think is an important thing to address is what success looks like when you've got more than one team. This is something that I really struggled with. If I looked at some of the older career frameworks that we had at Zappi, I didn't really identify with any of them. They were all based on the notion that a Scrum Master would have one team. I couldn't really achieve what was supposedly expected out of me as a junior or a mid-level Scrum Master because I had 3 teams, not 1. So was I failing, or was I actually doing a really good job considering? Well, what becomes impossible? Impossible might be a strong word here, but let me tell you briefly what things I found become hard when working with more and more Scrum teams. Understanding the team's domain. I've already mentioned this, but there's more that gets affected by this than just an inability to block the team. It becomes hard to protect the team from distractions. It becomes hard to know what outside interactions with the team are unhelpful. It becomes hard to help the product owner with the product backlog refinement, and the list goes on. Again, I've already mentioned this, but being proactive becomes impossible, or at least very hard. More than once, things have come to head before I've realized and then stepped in to help too late. Implementing changes quickly. Because you might have a list of priorities, something rather small that the team might want to change about their process might take time. An example is, I've promised the Oilers a couple of weeks ago that we can review the definition of done. I still haven't gotten around to it, unfortunately, and what might need a small plaster now could turn into being in need of an amputation later because I wasn't able to act fast enough. Serving the organization. We all know that a Scrum Master's duty doesn't necessarily end with a team, but if you're so busy with your teams, you might not have time to serve the organization with its Scrum needs. Achieving the perfect Scrum team, the nirvana for all Scrum Masters, and something that I think takes real time, dedication, and focus. And if your focus is split, well, this becomes difficult, if not impossible. Finally, personal development. If you're like me, I always put my teams first, which means what I want to do falls to the bottom of that list that I mentioned and therefore never gets done. So as I'm back to discussing feeling like a failure, when I wasn't able to protect the focus of a team, or I wasn't able to resolve blockers quickly, I really felt as if I wasn't doing my job as a Scrum Master well, if at all. So I started thinking, if you do have to split your time between multiple Scrum teams and you can't quite do everything you'd hoped you could do, what is the bare minimum that you have to do in order to call yourself a team's Scrum Master and be successful? Is it being there for the daily Scrum? Is it facilitating all the meetings as expected? Is it making sure they adhere to Scrum and as it's defined in the Scrum Guide? Or is it helping the product owner manage the backlog? This was something that played on my mind for a long time when I took on my third team. I was facilitating all their meetings, I was having some fun conversations, getting to know them on Slack, and I was advising them on how best to handle certain situations with regards to Scrum and the process. Was that enough? For a very long time, I didn't feel like it was, and I even felt uncomfortable referring to myself as their Scrum Master. But after a while, and after some very kind feedback, I realized that I was doing exactly what they needed the most. And whilst I realized I could provide more value given more capacity, I was doing the best I could, and I was providing the value that they needed the most. So I think the very least anyone needs to do in order to call themselves a team Scrum Master is to do what needs doing the most. Are the team able to facilitate their own meetings and ensure actions are completed, but they can't manage blockers? Then focus on the blockers and leave them to continue facilitating their own meetings. Do they successfully handle all their blockers, but the product owner is struggling making sense of the backlog? Then jump in on the backlog and see if you can help fix that with the product owner. If you have to split your time and focus, then at least make the most of the time you can spare. What it took me a long time to realize was being a Scrum Master to two teams who are doing good is just as much, if not more of a success than being a Scrum Master to one team who's doing great. So don't beat yourself up if all of your teams aren't the perfect Scrum team that you'd hope they'd be. So far tonight, I've told you all about me and my situation being a Scrum Master to 3 teams simultaneously. I've taken you on a short journey of Scrum to try to establish where this trend is coming from. And whilst I wasn't able to give you a definitive answer, I've definitely given you my take on things. I hope that I've at least proven that it is in fact a trend, and it's now the new normal to expect a Scrum Master to juggle multiple teams. I've also briefly covered what success should look like to a multi-team Scrum Master. So what next? Well, I'd like to impart some hints and tips I've picked up along the way that I hope you can take on board if you ever find yourself in a similar boat. I've just realized I'm making a lot of boating references this evening, and I'm not sure why, because I'm not one that's comfortable in the sea. But anyway, moving on. Tips, and not the PG kind, because I'm a Twinings extra strong blend kind of girl, if you're interested. So firstly, be honest with yourself, with your team, and with those around you, including your line manager or your supervisor if you have one. Admit if you're getting swamped or that you can no longer manage. Don't burn yourself out. Set expectations. Whilst you know that you can't perform to the same level as a dedicated Scrum Master, your teams might not realize that. Tell them what you can do and what you can't. Put it down in an informal working contract if you have to, and you can refer back to it if the going gets tough. Acknowledge that you will drop the ball. And that's linked to this photo here of this lady juggling. I think it's a beautiful beach or a desert, but acknowledge that you will drop the ball and hopefully she won't. Even with the best intentions in the world, you will drop the ball. Something will happen that you could have prevented. You will forget to do something that will be crucial. Acknowledge it, learn from it. How could you avoid dropping that ball next time without having to keep your eye on it? Ask for help. Just this week, a developer on one of my teams asked me if I could unblock a story. I had to say that I just didn't have the capacity and would he mind unblocking it for me? He did so gladly. Don't assume that just because you're in that position, it doesn't mean you can't seek help from those around you who will more than likely be happy to help. Finally, try to change things. Just because you have to look after multiple teams now doesn't mean it has to be like that forever. Learn why you're in that position. Is there anything you could do to change it? Is there a developer in your team that would like to upskill to be a Scrum Master one day who'd like to help you and could help you by taking on some other responsibilities? You might not be successful, but there's nothing saying that you can't try to change things. Oh, and I did in the meetup description promise to tell you how best to answer this clanger. So which team is your favorite? Now, this is almost always asked to me by a colleague whilst they're in the Camden Head, which is Zappi's favourite haunt in Camden, back in the days when we were allowed to freely allowed to frequent such places as pubs. How to answer this question? Well, first of all, if the person asking is in one of your teams, let's say the Oilers, and there is absolutely no one else around, and you make them pinky promise not to tell anyone what your answer is, don't be tempted to say the Oilers just to try and get some quick brownie points. Word will get out and you'll have a PR crisis on your hands Monday morning when the other two teams find out. Now, I don't have children, but I'd suggest answering this question as if you had many children and was asked who was your favourite child. Just say, I couldn't possibly choose. I love them all equally and they're each special in their own way. So I think those tips are fine, but I thought it would also be useful if I shared some Scrum Master hacks, things that you can start doing straight away if you're in this position that might make life a little easier. Reuse your retros. Since all my teams had 2 week-long sprints, I would run the same retro with all 3 teams in that 2-week period. So I'd only have to come up with a new retro format every other week. Caveat, every now and again, a team does need a specific retro to tackle a specific problem. So this isn't a hard and fast rule, but where I can stick to it, I would. Standardize where you can. Whilst the process your teams follow might be different, the way you work doesn't have to be. Can you use the same format of Excel sheet for your velocity tracking across all teams? Can you use the same format of documents for retro notes, etc.? Schedule big changes. One of my teams realized that they would like to move over to Kanban, and I quickly realized that all 3 teams would benefit from moving over to Kanban too. Don't be tempted to make that big of a change across all teams at once. Do it once, learn from it, and do it again better. It'll take longer, and one team who's waiting in the last of the queue might get a bit fed up of waiting, but it'll help you, trust me. Balance out your meetings. If you have 2, 3, 4 teams, don't be tempted to have all your Scrum teams in the same week. Spread them out. For me, in my 2-week sprints for 3 teams, I would have 2 retros this week and 1 retro next week. Whilst the idea of a busy week of Scrum meetings alternating with a quiet week sounds good, you'll burn out faster than you think. I tried it for about 3 months. I'd spend the whole of every other Tuesday in sprint meetings, and I still get nightmares about it to this day. Group your daily scrums together. Developers often talk about disrupting their focus, and guess what? You need to protect your focus too. Try to group your daily scrums so they come one after the other. Having to jump on Zoom for 50 minutes here and there is a productivity killer, whereas getting them all done in a nice 45-minute slot leaves you free to concentrate. Be organized. If you're going to be looking after 2 or more teams, you're going to need to be organized. If you're not already an organized person, then learn how to be an organized person. Take notes, and whatever you do, do not make a promise if you haven't written it down somewhere. Investigate if there are any tools that can help you. For example, I used to have to copy and paste my annual leave from my calendar into 3 separate team calendars. Thanks to a new Slack tool we have, I've configured it to do that for me. Use a Trello board if you think it would be helpful to keep on top of your tasks. I also use Easy Retro, formerly known as Fun Retro, for retrospectives, and they have a clone board button, which clones the board, saving me have to create a new one every time. These might only save a few seconds here and there, but it soon adds up. Just look out for those quick tech fixes that can help. Finally, this evening, I'd like to look at this one more time. A good Scrum Master can handle 2 teams. A great Scrum Master can handle 1. When I was preparing for this talk, I spent a lot of time thinking about whether or not I agreed with this statement. And you know what? I disagree. I think in an ideal world, all Scrum Masters should only have to handle 1 team. But I think a great Scrum Master is one that can add value to a team, regardless of how many other teams are vying for their attention. I think a great Scrum Master can handle as many teams as they have to, 1, 2, 3, or 17. It's just a bonus if you only have to handle 1. And thank you all for your attention this evening. I hope I've said something that will be of use to at least one of you. Before I open up to questions, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to keep this conversation going. And I'd now like to open it up for any questions, any comments, any opinions, thoughts, or experiences. Everything's welcome. But again, thank you very much.
Gwen, thank you very much indeed for such an amazing talk, and absolutely brilliant. I mean, I think you had us all absolutely engaged, just wondering what was coming next. The claps are coming as well, so absolutely fantastic inaugural event, certainly. And hopefully now we can get some really good questions going with the audience. And please do come on camera, please do come off mic, off mute, I should say, come on mic, and actually come and ask some questions to Gwen. But Gwen, thank you for just such a really engaging talk. And it's a shame I didn't know you a few years ago, because I worked for 2 years next door to the Twinings factory.
That's a shame. I didn't see that coming.
Used to get free tea every week, so just saying.
Oh, good.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you, guys. It's too kind, I'm sure.
I wanted to say also thank you. I'm actually still here. I should have left at 7 o'clock, but I'm still here. I was so engaged. It was really good. So just wanted to give a big clap for you on that one. Thank you. Welcome. Really good.
Brilliant. So we've actually got some questions that are coming in chat, and obviously, if people are feeling happy and do want to come and share them and raise them themselves, then please do. But we've got one from Pradeep, who's asked the question: in your view, what's the difference between an agile coach and Scrum coach, or a Scrum Master, he means? So the difference between an agile coach and a Scrum Master. That's
an interesting question. And that's something that I've been very recently fighting with, because I thought an answer to my problems would be to move up into more of an agile coach role. And obviously when you coach, I think it's a much less hands-on type of role. But what I realized was that for you to be an agile coach, ideally you have a very strong Scrum Master that you can lean on. So for me, the difference would be, in an ideal world, every team would have a Scrum Master, and then there would be an overarching agile coach who would then also work across 2, 3, or 4 teams to sort of guide that Scrum Master in how they work. But it is a really interesting question. But that's what I think the difference is. A Scrum Master needs to be much more hands-on, and an agile coach can be at much more of a higher level.
Pradeep, do you have a particular view on this yourself, in terms of providing any sort of feedback to the community here this evening?
I can't really talk. I've got 2 kids who makes a lot of noise. But yes, I was just wondering, because she just said that a great Scrum Master can add value to more teams. But then that statement can't be true, because if you are labeled as Scrum Master, then you have to do all the ceremonies, and then if you do that for all the teams, then you are not really adding value. That's where Agile coach comes in. So yeah, I would still stick with a great Scrum Master can add more value to one team, because he can spend more time seeing where he can add more value. More teams you add on, then it's very difficult. You can be a good Scrum Master, but not a great one. That's my view.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I guess it's a case of, even if you have got 17 teams, you can still identify what every team really needs from you. You know, maybe they only need someone to be in there to help them unblock things, and you can get away with not having to do their ceremonies because they can do that themselves. So I think you can provide value, but like you said, ideally it would be an Agile coach that would be sort of leading this.
Okay, great. We've got one from Rohit. I know he had his hand up a moment ago. So Rohit, over to you, sir.
Yeah, I think. Thanks, Gwen. That was an interesting talk. I just wanted to know, like, I think we have like a different view of a Scrum Master, right? For me, a Scrum Master is whatever team needs for, right? When you mentioned that team is asking you to unblock a story and you say, can you do it for me? I think our role is mainly to make them self-organizing, right? Basically make our roles redundant, basically, right? So what I felt is you're probably doing more of like a PM kind of role rather than as a Scrum Master, because Scrum Master for me, if team comes to me and say, Rohit, I need this help, right? Then I go and help them. You know, then there's a document model. So depending on how many teams we can basically support, be a servant leader depends on the maturity level of the team. If team is like performing, we can have 5 teams and we can still do it. If team is forming level, it's very hard to do more than one team, because we need to actually coach them and into Scrum values or Kanban, whatever they want to do, right? And obviously instill the technical mastery and all what they're doing, you know, the process of Scrum process, right? And the framework, we need to, mentor them. So that's what I believe, yeah.
I agree with you completely. And I actually had this conversation very recently with one of my teams. I actually told them, I want to step back. I want to coach you more than Scrum Master you. But the argument that they came back with was, whilst they're more than capable to unblock themselves, while they're more than capable to facilitate these meetings themselves, they don't want to have to do that. They want to focus on getting the code out the door. They don't want to have to worry. And whilst I agree with you, that's what the team wants. They still want that someone there so that they don't have to cloud their focus with all these different sorts of priorities.
Yeah. So what happens when you're on holiday? Someone takes the role?
So when I'm on holiday, I usually lean on my product owners, and the same when the product owner goes on holiday, they lean on me. But I did try an experiment recently where I left one of my teams for 4 weeks without any warning to see what happened. And it was actually quite surprising what happened. It didn't turn out as good as I hoped, but that's a different story for another time.
So can I just chime in here? Having read Jeff's book, the book he wrote on Scrum Master, I think it's called
Scrum Master.
Right,
yeah.
From Good to Great Servant Leadership. So in one instance, the Scrum Master deliberately did not turn up at the daily iteration on time, just to see what was going to happen. And they were all there waiting for the Scrum Master to turn up to kick the meeting off. And he was the Scrum Master was quite bemused that, why do you need me? I'm not the one getting any conversations going. You guys organize yourselves and then do what needs to be done.
Yeah.
Now, there was another story about, I know we've all heard the Nanny McPhee story, but you can only help a team to a point. And they get to that point that you expect them to be able to help themselves. A great Scrum Master should be one that can afford to be sacked because they've done all the work, i.e. they do themselves out of work. And that way you've done your job and you're confident enough to be able to move on to something else. And this is where the difference lies between Scrum Mastery and Agile coaching. Scrum Mastery aligned with a team or a number of teams. Agile coaching actually steps completely away from team approach and cuts across the entire organization, whether individual, whether teams, whether leadership. They're able to step into any requirement that needs that coaching, that help, that guidance, facilitation, orchestration, troubleshooting, just sort of prompting those initiatives. What have they not thought about? So the Scrum Master gets quite involved at macro level. Yeah. Just getting to see what's going on, questioning them, why are you doing that? But when you step away, then you stop being that nanny. And it's very important for a great Scrum Master to be able to deliberately and intentionally stop getting involved and let them make their own mistakes, let them learn from those mistakes, let them correct themselves. Don't give them answers, let them find the way, drop them in the middle of the desert, take their compass away from them, and give them just one bottle of water to share between themselves, and they will decide who takes the first sip.
Yeah,
Good
that's
one,
actually,
Jamie. That's it.
actually a really good experiment. And the biggest chaos that I caused when I did step away for a month was I deleted all the Zoom links from their calendar invites, and just watching the panic on Zoom every morning at 44 when they were trying to find a Zoom link for stand-up was priceless. But Femi, you've got really good points there. Thank you for sharing.
Brilliant, as ever for me and Rohit. Thank you very much. Now we've got Lohit. It's your chance for a question.
Thanks, Giles. Hello, Gwen. Yeah, just looking for an answer out of your experiences. You have said that one is expected or bound to burn out when managing multiple Scrum teams. Like, then how does a Scrum Master pick up themselves, when they're completely burned out? Whether the Scrum Master is allowed to open up to the development team saying that, guys, I'm feeling burned out. Can anyone kick in this week? So whether the Scrum Master have this feeling of being judged when he kind of asks these questions to the development team.
I guess for me, one of the main roles of the Scrum Master is to keep an eye on their developers if they're burning out. And whilst I don't expect the developers to be keeping an eye on the Scrum Master getting burned out, I would hope that a Scrum Master would be comfortable enough to say, hey team, I've got a lot of stuff going on at the moment. Can anybody help me for a bit and just give me some support here? Or there's also the option of leaning on other Scrum Masters in the organization. We've got quite a good community in Zappi of our Scrum Masters, and we're sort of quite honest. We'll say, hey, I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. Can anybody come in here and help me? But I think for me, it's just about being honest. Just be honest with your team. Just say, hey, like I'm getting really stressed now. This is overwhelming me. What can we do to change it? In the same way that you would look out for them, ask them what they can do to look out for you.
Yeah, thanks.
Grant, I believe you're next up.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Grant. That was a great talk. I've got a question. I've got going back to probably near the start of your presentation, where you mentioned there was sort of 10 teams, 80 people, 2 full-time Scrum Masters, 2 developers that were stepping up to the Scrum Master role. And I was thinking, well, you've got 2 developers stepping up, so they've set the precedent. So why did that not happen in some of the other teams? And is it a contextual thing? Is it the maturity level of those teams, or was there another reason?
So first of all, Grant, you've got an excellent memory. Fair play.
I wrote it down.
Fair play. So it's quite an interesting one, actually. So the reason that the 2 developers that did step up to be Scrum Masters did so was because they really wanted to do that. They really wanted to sort of get a bit of hands-on experience. The reason why we haven't had any more do that is because they don't want to. And in Zappi, we're very autonomous. We're a flat hierarchy. No one has to do what they don't want to do. So we can't just say, hey team, someone here has to step up and be Scrum Master. That's not how we do. What I'm going to try and do in the next few months is try and persuade some developers if they'd like to maybe go down this route. I'm hoping to spend a bit more time with some teams that don't have a Scrum Master and see if I can identify easy targets and just sort of maybe hit them over the head with the Scrum Guide a few times, and some sense will go into them. But yeah, that's why we've had 2, and that's why we haven't had any more than 2. But also, the 2 that we have had, it is a struggle for them, because it's a lot of development work that they've got to undertake, and they do regularly lean on myself and the other dedicated Scrum Master for a bit more maybe help and guidance, which is expected because this is my focus, where it's only maybe 20% of their focus, but that's why.
Perhaps that could be your next talk in a couple of months when you've tried the experiment. Come back and tell us how you've done.
I would love to, but
Right.
I miss the fact that I might have hit anybody over the head with any books or guides.
Well, the good thing now is the Scrum Guide is only down to 13 pages, so it's a bit lighter. So.
It is, but I can print it on thicker paper, I'm sure.
It's okay, because I believe prisons have Zoom facilities in them now as well. So Gwen, you'll be absolutely fine for GBH and everything else. So yeah, you're fine.
Perfect.
We'll certainly love to have you back and share some of the research and data in the future. We've actually got a question. I'm just going to have to scroll slightly further up the question list. Nestle asked a question earlier. In the presentation, it stated that Scrum Master should take the action for challenges. I wonder what Gwen did in her company as being against Scrum Master of multi-teams to explain this is not as efficient as expected.
To be honest with you, I actually had a bit of an existential crisis at the start of this year when one of our permanent Scrum Masters decided to leave the company. And I think COVID was just starting to break out, and we weren't very sure what was happening due to the financials. And whilst we did have a plan to replace them, because as it happens, they were the sole Scrum Master in the Cape Town office, we didn't actually manage to go through with it because just budgeting constraints. It's a difficult time at the moment. We're all very lucky to still be in paid positions. So that's why we haven't been able to expand that. In an ideal world, I think we definitely would. We definitely hire 1, if not 2 other Scrum Masters. But that's why. But again, we've got very good communication between we haven't the CTO. We understand the benefits of Scrum Masters, but unfortunately, our wallets just won't allow it right now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Does anybody else have any other amazing questions for Gwen to answer this evening? Otherwise, if it's all good and we have just gone past the 7:30 mark, I will say thank you to anyone. I don't think there's anyone else there. Look, Gwen, I got to say, absolutely phenomenal. Brilliant. So glad we chatted however many weeks ago now and persuaded you to do this and got in. And I know you and Chantal had some great chats as well. But thank you very much indeed. And we do look forward to having you here again. I think actually, no, I know who's up next. We have Dean actually up next next week. And then it's some weird bloke called Giles the week after. So anyway, forget him. But thank you again, Gwen. Now, what I have done is I have pasted, for people who may have seen my note earlier, we have got a global Slack community for people in the Agile world, people who want to be part of a truly global Agile community. There's a lot of the members here I know already on it, but we are sharing it to as many people as we can. We've got people from obviously Asia, Americas, Africa, Europe as well, and it's great, really amazing place to be part of, such a great community. And again, only earlier this evening, Chantal was sharing Gwen's talk to everybody at the community, letting them know. And I know Rohit was also mentioning some amazing upcoming talks he's got lined up as well. But otherwise, with all said and done, I'd just like to thank everybody again, as always, for coming. It's always great to see some great faces and some familiar names coming to the events. It is for you guys. It's for the community, by the community as ever. And I look forward to all seeing you this time next week on the 26th to be here with Dean Luciana. So see you all then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Cheers, Gwen.
Thank you. Cheers, bye.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you. Thank you, Giles. See you.
Cheers, guys.